In the summer of 1893, 27 million people came to Chicago for the World's Fair. Some of them checked into a hotel 3 blocks from the fairgrounds. Not all of them checked out. For decades, the story told about that hotel was that it had gas lines piped into locked, soundproof rooms, trapdoors that dropped guests straight into the basement, and a furnace built specifically to destroy a body. 200 people, some say, never made it home. But when investigators finally opened the walls of that building, most of what they found wasn't torture equipment. It was something almost more disturbing. A business built entirely on convincing people to trust a man who had already killed before the fair ever opened. Herman Webster Mudgett arrived in Chicago in 1886 under a new name, Dr. Henry Howard Holmes. He took a job at a pharmacy on the corner of 63rd and Wallace in the Englewood neighborhood, and within a few years he owned the store outright. Across the street sat an empty lot. Holmes bought it, and over the next several years built upward. First a second floor of apartments, then, as the World's Fair approached, a third floor he told contractors would become a hotel for the incoming tourists. The resultant structure was dubbed the Castle. Subsequent authors would describe more than 100 rooms set up like a maze. Bedrooms equipped with gas jets that Holmes could operate from a closet, staircases leading to blank walls, doors opening onto brick, and a soundproofed vault where, so the story goes, he watched victims suffocate through a peephole. It was alleged that bodies were dropped straight into a basement containing acid vats and a specially constructed kiln where the flesh was removed from the bone before the skeletons were sold to medical schools. This is the version most people know. It is also, according to the historians who have gone back through Holmes's actual construction records, almost entirely exaggerated. Holmes did build secret passages. He did install a kiln. He did sell cadavers to medical schools. None of that is myth. What is myth is the idea that any of it was built to murder World's Fair tourists. The Castle, historians have learned, was never a working hotel at all. Holmes told contractors and investors about the third story, but it remained mostly incomplete with no personnel, no furniture, and no public opening. The secret rooms that later shocked reporters were mostly used for something else, hiding furniture Holmes had bought on credit and never paid for, so he could resell it before creditors came looking. The kiln was there, but before he ever constructed the castle, Holmes had been selling stolen cadavers to medical schools for years. This habit sprang from his time in medical school, when he discovered how insurance settlements could be made from mutilated, accidental bodies. Because here is what Holmes was actually running underneath the ghost story: an insurance operation. He took out policies on business partners, on employees, on mistresses, naming himself the beneficiary, then engineered their deaths to look accidental. He forged deeds. He married at least 3 women, without divorcing the ones before them. Long before the castle existed, he'd already worked out how to profit from a body. He stole cadavers from his own medical school, disfigured them to look like accident victims, then planted them and collected on policies he'd taken out under false names. The castle wasn't the beginning of his crimes. It was simply the biggest building he'd ever had to launder them through, and the first one large enough that the truth could hide inside the walls instead of on paper. Holmes was never arrested for anything that happened inside the castle. What caught him was a con that went wrong in Philadelphia, more than a year after the fair had closed. His longtime associate, Benjamin Peitzel, agreed to fake his own death so Holmes could collect a $10,000 life insurance payout and split it with him. Instead, Holmes killed Peitzel for real, then convinced Peitzel's wife to let 3 of her children travel with him, supposedly to be reunited with their father. He killed all 3 in 3 different cities over the following weeks. An insurance investigator's suspicion about the original Peitzel claim was what finally put detectives on Holmes's trail. And it was the deaths of those 3 children, not anything found inside the castle, that sent him to trial. When the castle was finally searched afterward, investigators found burned clothing, human remains, and physical evidence connecting Holmes to, at minimum, 9 deaths. He confessed, eventually, to 27, but several of the people he named turned up alive after the confession was published. One woman he claimed to have murdered in 1892 was tracked down by a newspaper, very much still living in Omaha. So where did 200 victims come from? Not from Holmes's trial, and not from the physical evidence. The number traces back to a single sensationalized book published decades later in 1940 that repeated an unverified estimate as if it were established fact. And once it was in print, every retelling after it treated the number as settled history. It never was. The castle itself never got the chance to become a fair attraction, either. Shortly after Holmes's arrest, the building burned down in a fire investigators believed was set deliberately. Witnesses reported seeing two men enter the building late at night. Whether it was hired arson to destroy evidence or vigilantes trying to erase the building's memory was never determined. What's left is a case where the sensational version and the real version tell almost opposite stories. In the sensational version, Holmes murdered hundreds of strangers inside an elaborate torture hotel built for the World's Fair. In the real version, he killed a much smaller, but still devastating, number of people he already knew, mostly through poison, gas, and staged accidents. The insurance fraud was the actual business. The murders were almost incidental to it. Holmes was hanged in Philadelphia in May 1896 and asked to be buried under a heavy layer of concrete so his body could never be exhumed and studied the way he'd studied so many others. In 2017, his descendants had the grave opened anyway, and DNA testing confirmed the remains were his. The castle survived the 1895 fire in a reduced form and stood for another 4 decades, used as ordinary retail space, before the site was sold to the federal government and demolished in 1938. Today, an Englewood post office sits on the exact footprint. There's no plaque, there's no marker. Postal workers have reported cold spots and unexplained sounds in the basement for years. It's a haunting, attached to a building that isn't even the one people think it is. Almost nothing of Holmes's original structure survives underneath it. The scariest part of the H.H. Holmes story was never the trapdoors. It's how easily an unverifiable number, printed once in 1940, became history for the next 80 years, and how many other true crime legends might be running on the same kind of evidence. If you want to see where that pattern started even earlier, go watch our video on the Bloody Benders, a family that vanished days before anyone caught them and were never conclusively identified again. Subscribe for a new dark history case every week.